example, and
Yes.
we have now three discussants.
Mm-hmm.
So Daryna, Diego, and Theo. So you have the floor. They just share the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. Can you do the full screen? You can just move down a little bit. Social anxiety is hitting.
Mm. There's a big problem.
Okay, perfect. We're good to go. So first of all, I would like to say, you hearing us?
Yeah, I'm here. I see you. I see, but I don't see the slide.
You can share the screen, yeah. And the window. Here, écran. Do you see right now?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's
Thank
start.
you.
What? Micro is not working?
No, I hear you, but
Okay, it works. Perfect.
yeah.
So thank you so much for the presentation. Today we'd like to continue with our critique part of local planning, democracy and health in Kerala, social development without growth. The presentation was prepared by Diego from Switzerland, Theo from
Germany,
and me from Ukraine. So let's go quickly through the outline of our presentation. I will discuss a little bit the summary of the paper just to remind you. Then Diego will go through the success and limits to participation, public participation, and some examples. I will discuss the remittance economic contradiction and inequality. And Theo will finish with the Karela as a case of post-development and can development without growth actually work. So let's start with the summary of the paper. So first of all, I would like to show you on the map where Ben lives. It's a Karela region, very beautiful region. And in the paper, the concept of Karela model is considered as a case of high social development without high economic growth. So historically, it was achieved by historically, we can see the success in high levels of health, literacy, and social policies. And these outcomes were mainly driven by the public institutions, political mobilization, decentralization, and long-term investments in education and health. But if we consider the period of the post-1990s, it was mainly driven by this growth was driven by the large-scale migration and remittances. So the main argument of this paper is like a social development without growth, as like articulated with social movements, community mobilization, and participatory democracy. And Diego will go on with the success and limits of this participation.
Yes, I would like to talk a bit about this tension of decentralization within a state. And we heard a lot about the Kerala case, and we heard that some of the things that were successful, but of course there's also limits tied to the fact that there's a dependence on budget, on there's bureaucratization, and in the end you also mentioned declining participation. Another case, and it's a famous case, and by coincidence Andrea, I don't know where she is now, but she talked about it, the same case before, so I'm not going to go into the detail, but Porto Alegre, we heard about it. It's also one of the most famous cases when we talk about participation, public participation. Just very short recap, in the 80s, after the dictatorship in Brazil, there started to be democratic movements, local bottom-up movements, especially in the city of Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil, where these neighborhood organizations, these associações de moradores, got to really decide on the spending of the budget and could really voice their opinion. I'm mentioning this also because there is some problem in the 2000s. Then there was a financial crisis, and the Partido dos Trabalhadores that was before in power and was really important for this participation project lost power, and then after this participation basically went down a lot. The budget was reduced, and I think it still exists to some extent, but it's not what it was before. Basically, this led me to the question, like, can a genuine decentralization actually occur within a state? So some opinions on that. I'm citing here, or I'm talking here about Colin Ward. He's a British anarchist, and he talked about public participation in the context of the UK. So there was also a participation movement, I think mainly associated with David Cameron, his association, his administration. And basically what Colin Ward says is that this public participation is merely a legitimization for the state policy. So it's not really authentic bottom-up, but it subordinates the whole concept of the public to an external authority. And here I have the quote, basically it's entirely in keeping with the discursive boundaries of a liberal democratic society. And he also emphasizes the importance of really being in genuine control of the resources as a key issue. All of this bottom-up decentralized approach is at the heart of anarchism, at least as much as I understand it. So we have a lot of keywords that you will hear a lot if you read anarchist authors: altruism, mutual aid, cooperation. Piotr Kropotkin is a famous anarchist who had shared this view of decentralized, autonomous associations. And what I find really interesting, he even went as far as to criticize Darwin for his theory of evolution, stating basically that it's not the most fit or the most adapted species that reproduce, or individuals, but actually the ones that are most able to cooperate. And I find this quite an interesting thought. Health is also a central topic in these anarchist writings. Just to mention here, Emma Goldman, who's a famous American anarchist, she wrote a lot about reproductive rights for women, and in general they have more like a holistic systemic view on it, stating the importance of inequalities, labor, and so on. And this is also like this reproductive rights is also, I think, a topic that really spreads through the history of anarchism. So let's now look at some historical examples of autonomous as an organization in the health sector. The first ones, the friendly societies, were studied by Colin Ward that I mentioned just before. So we're in the UK setting still in the end of the 1600s, so the guild system was declining. There were these friendly societies starting to pop up. Basically, these were just bottom-up, regional, very local organizations that were again in the spirit of mutual help, insurance, and so on. So basically, the normal people, workers, would contribute some fee, and then had access to doctors, hospitals that were often like elected by themselves, even, or at least the organization. So, yeah, basically, at some point, all neighborhoods of every town. I mean, that's a quotation from a paper I read. Or apparently like 3/4 of all manual workers were actually subscribers, were part of these friendly societies that only lost influence then when the state actually pushed into this area of health. Another example, I think I'm going to go a bit quickly, is the Freedom House ambulance that was we're in the Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. I don't know, Peter, if you've heard of them, yeah? No, I will have to read that. Thank you. So basically, before the 60s in the US and probably in many other countries, there was no established paramedics. So there was hospitals, but if someone had an accident, there were just laymen or police officers, or I heard apparently even like undertakers that would do first aid. But there was no proper training. And especially in black neighborhoods where a lot of black people lived, people were neglected. There was not really any aid for them. So they just started organizing themselves, and they started training lay people, like laymen, normal people, giving them a really rigorous training, as you can see, like including anatomy and so on. And this was extremely successful. Like it spread a lot from there, and apparently became actually then the standard for these paramedics education that is still in the US, can be found there. And very briefly, the Chain Collective, again, in the spirit of reproductive rights, also interesting in the 60s before Roe v. Wade, so there was no legal abortion, basically, and these collectives were doing a lot of education, counseling, and also did a lot of illegal abortions themselves. Yeah. So to finish off, also there's current examples as well. I chose to go for the Zapatistas, probably Andrea knows, yeah, in the south of Mexico, in Chiapas. Again, historically it started from a position of neglection, discrimination in this area, because there's a lot of indigenous people, and in the context of the trade agreement, the NAFTA, people took up arms and started doing a revolution. Health was at the center of it, and they started building this whole network of microclinics with nodes and health promoters, and basically had a great success. So just to conclude this, there's a lot of examples of real bottom-up movements that started without any connection to the state at all, that have proven successful, but of course there remains some kind of tension and dependence on other state authorities.
All right, and I would like to continue with another question that's in my mind can limit a little bit, does it work? Limit a little bit understanding of the concept of Carella's model. So it's about the remittance economy contradiction. In the paper it was mentioned that despite a low income level and poor record in generating income, Carella still had life higher life expectancy at birth than South Korea. Like it's 72 years to 71 years in South Korea, despite capita income being a great many times larger. And this is the factor that also frames as a social development in Kerala's model. But then it was mentioned that growth was triggered by the peculiar way. So in the mid-2000s, Kerala was extroverted economy with 30 to 40% of GDP coming from the remittances of expatriates. And here the graph that shows this dynamics, so we can see that it's pretty large percentage. So here we can like ask the question, can we really analyze the Kerala's participatory health planning without centering the fact that that it operates within the economy that is highly dependent on the immigrant workers? And to understand the implications of this dependency, it also quoted that poorly qualified construction workers as well as highly qualified nurses and doctors went to Gulf countries, Middle East countries, and also to the like higher educated to the US and UK. But what it is really in reality, what are the implications of the reality? So labor export to exploitative regimes, because low-educated contractors went to Gulf kafala countries with this program, and they had a lot of limitations and constraints regarding their mobility, regarding their human rights, etc. The second is that there is a brain drain, because also those people who are highly educated in medicine, they like get training in Kerala, and then they leave to the US, to UK to get a higher salary. So like just to compare examples with Brazil, they have like endogenous capacity building, while Kerala has Kerala is dependent on external economic conditions, and it really creates the exogenous dependency, that is social consumption funded by income generated under the labor conditions that Kerala would not really accept in reality. And also it was mentioned that private investments based on the remittances, those account for increasing demand in such sectors as house construction, household equipment, health and education. And 20 years later, 20 private clinics were built, and also 3 other medical centers. And the enforcement, like according to the paper, mainly because of the decentralization and local planning. But like when private expenditures define the expansion of health and education services, local planning operates within this structure, because it is already shaped by private incentives rather than purely public priorities. And decentralization local planning may appear participatory, but the economic base that drives like is shaped by remittances, and it also raises this autonomy question. And another question that I would raise is the inequality, since we are talking about the social development, because also it was mentioned that there's phenomenal difference in the expenditures on health between those households with inflow of remittances and others. And here we can see the graph that explains the Gini coefficient equality, and it's pretty high because it's 0.4. And like it raises the questions: who can migrate, who cannot, how this changes income distribution, how this affects class structure. And these are the clear signals of inequality, despite even if life expectancy rose, even if literacy rose, the distribution of this gene is unequal, and I think it matters. And then, Tao, your turn.
Thank you very much. Now I will talk a little bit about Kerala as a case for post-development. To begin with, I will explain a little bit what post-development actually is about. So post-development basically is based on the critique that the single universal concept of for progress is not the right approach. And it criticizes development as a European or Eurocentric concept that is growth-oriented and based on industrial production and mass consumption. And it rejects the idea of modernization and catching up to an unsustainable lifestyle that is based on exploitation of resources and externalization of the costs. And this imperial mode of living is mainly prevalent in the global north, but also increasingly in the global south. And it's unsustainable and, most importantly, therefore not generalizable. So this kind of model cannot serve as orientation for development in the future in a world that is already beyond many ecological and social boundaries. And it underlines the need for an alternative to development. So post-development instead advocates for a pluriverse, which describes a world where many multiple ontologies and worldviews and ways of living coexist, and it advocates for community-led and self-determined pathways of progress that, with a focus on living well, which is often expressed in philosophies like the Buen Vivir in Latin America or Ubuntu in Africa or Swarai in India. So let's take a look at the case of Kerala. So basically, the case showed that it's possible to improve the qualities of life without the necessity of growth. And basically it's highlighted as a concept that is in line with post-development theory. And the interesting characteristic of Kerala is that it's based on a bottom-up planning structure. And this is interesting because it's also a way of self-determining the future. And it starts with addressing the most basic needs of the society and makes use of local knowledge. And in the case of Kerala, this led to an improvement in health instead of industrialization, which in many other cases often just is about more satisfying the unsustainable needs of consumption habits of the global north instead of improving the quality of life in local communities. And so there was also a bit of self-determined industrial production, for example, with Ayurveda medicine. And by building on local resources, this increases self-sufficiency and reduces external dependency. But of course, this also comes with significant challenges. So as already highlighted, financial resources or the restricted access to financial means is one of the key constraints of this project, and it relies to a large extent on external income that is generated elsewhere in growing economies. And healthcare that is provided is still pretty basic in many aspects, and advancements would require like technological improvements, and this obviously in turn requires requires some material throughput, especially infrastructure, and with limited local available resources, this also creates a need for resources from outside, which again could lead to long-term dependencies. So how can we deal with the problem of these financial constraints? So I think the socialist calculation debate could provide some valuable insights into understanding more about the actual limitations of development projects. The issue that is focused here is that we came to accept and don't question anymore the fact that everything in the economy has a price tag. But this is obviously not a matter of course. This is something that we created. And the problem of calculating things in monetary terms is that it's often presenting a kind of false or highly abstracted perception of the underlying resources that we need to realize a project. And in that sense, Otto von Neurath, for example, proposed an economic accounting in kind, so using real quantities of goods instead of monetary units. Other proponents of the economy of the socialist calculation debate advocated more for labor units or other other accounting units. But using these alternative methods of economic accounting could then make actually the cost of a project more transparent. Yeah, another aspect that we always tend to forget sometimes is that things have a price because it's usually owned by private entities or private actors, and they want to be compensated for that, for giving up their property. And this is also despite the fact that oftentimes this property or this this property was acquired by some problematic or violent ways, for example, through colonization or through the help of governments or local entities, local authorities. And if these resources were owned by the local communities, they could then be used in order to pursue the projects without the need to pay for them. But obviously this is comes back to the anarchist thoughts that we have to get access to the resources. And it would then only require labor and some tools, and we would only have to use money to acquire resources from outside the community. For example, in the case of Kerala, the planting of Ayurveda, of plants for Ayurveda medicine doesn't require a lot of great investments, but if you want to get like commercial pharmaceuticals from outside, then you obviously, yes, you need money. But here it's important to recognize that also the price for these medicines or pharmaceuticals is not by no way a given fact, but it doesn't really reflect the resources that go into it, but it's more about the intellectual monopolization that creates such a high price. So what is important here is that if development strategies rely on a lot of resources from the outside, this also creates a higher need for acquiring resources and have to generate income. And this can create long-term path dependencies and also increase the risk of crisis once this income declines. So it's important to ask what kind of development is really important to improve the quality of life and to not unconsciously waste any resources or create dependencies. For example, lots of foreign exchange is often wasted in just luxury consumption goods and conspicuous consumption goods, and they don't really serve the needs of the society like medicine or capital goods that could be used for productive purposes. So in that sense, bottom-up planning is an appropriate strategy because it registers the most urgent needs of the society and makes use of or allows to find solution within the realm of what is available to the community. And alternative economic accounting, for example, on the base of real quantities of goods, labor units, or ecological resources, could then facilitate the planning process and enable alternatives to the mainstream development approaches. And thank you. This was it from the presentation. We have our questions. Diego first.
Yes, my question is about the preconditions for a successful participatory project in general, and also how you see this point that I mentioned. Do you think there's an inherent limit to these projects when they are kind of embedded in some centralized hierarchy, such as a nation state? Is there like an inherent tension?
Okay. My question, we'll go through all the questions and maybe you can answer. My question is about if you were to continue the research, what questions would you prioritize? What aspects of Kerala has decentralization worth to research more? But I think that you already answered on the first part of my question in the end of the presentation when you highlighted ecological crisis and development. So maybe you could just extend your answer. Thank you.
And I would like to know which strategies have been adopted in Kerala to deal with or to overcome the financial constraints.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So you have 5 or 10 minutes to answer, and after we will have some questions from the other students. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was really interesting the way you have enlarged the issues and the perspective. Okay, I take your three questions first, and because there are many things I would have to say about what you have introduced and the way you have discussed things. But first, your questions. So the inherent limits of the participatory project. I mean, it's really interesting that you have brought into the picture Porto Alegre and the other participatory budget experiences, because well, it's when I was saying that the Kerala model had some kind of strong international visibility in the 1990s, it was also true during the social forum which were organized at Porto Alegre. And for instance, when the first World Social Forum of Alter Globalist was taking place, I think it was 2001 or something like that, in Porto Alegre, there was direct discussion about the parallel and the differences between what was happening in Kerala and the Porto Alegre initiative. And one of the things which was mentioned in terms of the strong differences was the fact that in Kerala, it was not only about participation to the use of the budget. It was planning and the local planning for what should be the services and the some key public activities. So it was not only about the ways the budget is going to be spent, but also what are the needs. And the planning exercise was also an exercise into the assessment of local resources and needs. And this has a lot to do with the question of the limitation. I mean that well, I have mentioned in the paper a series of difficulties with the practice of the local planning and the decentralization, and we can well, discuss that a little deeper if you want. I mean, and there are basically two elements which are very often encountered in the experiences of local participation or local government, and one is the declining participation with time. And this happened in Kerala as well, with the consequence, for instance, that the assemblies which were taking place at the more local level, I mean at the neighborhood or the small subunits of villages or small towns were no longer taking place. However, the declining participation is very differentiated. And for instance, I don't remember whether I put it in the paper or not, but it's very differentiated according to class, with the fact that class and caste, with the fact that the most vulnerable groups of people and what in India are called the scheduled, that is officially recognized as discriminated by the law and by the state groups, whether castes or caste, were not, the participation was not declining. The participation increased, and those leaving the participation in the local planning in Kerala were actually the middle class and the upper castes, because the local planning, since it was associated with the organization of services, was taking care of many of the social benefits that the Kerala state was providing. And this has strong meaning, I think, which is that the difficulties or the limits of participation very often have to do with the isolated and the small scale of the experiment or the initiative. So it has to do with the kind of dependency either toward the states or toward the sources of revenues of income and that are linked to outside actors. And here, I mean, there is definitely a question of scale, which is important to take into account in terms of how much these limits are acting or not. And the second important limit which the Kerala local planning shows is the question of bureaucracy and technicization. I mean that with time the state technical experts have somehow increased their influence and their power on the discussion at the local level, also because of the, I mean, it's a movement combining declining participation, less pressure on the state itself and on the functionary, the civil servants and the experts of the state, and the possibility for instance, the experts of the health, the Department of Health Services to actually define the project. And one illustration of how this technicization and bureaucratization were going hand in hand is the fact that with time, many of the projects approved, many of the projects dealing with health approved in the local planning had been framed and proposed by the local doctors, by the professionals working in the local health centers. So there is this complex balance between real bottom-up exemplary achievements and this more complex negotiation with the states and its services, and with the difficulty at overcoming the putatively low expertise of the people. Regarding the second question, well, as you have mentioned, I mean, the question of the ecological crisis and what you pointed to in terms of post-development is what I would really investigate now, because of two reasons. One is, and we may come back, I don't talk a lot about that now, but one strong lesson of the Kerala experience, I think, is that it has been a specific discussion, whether at the state level or locally, about essential needs and the best way to identify, to prioritize these essential needs. And here the lessons are at two levels. One is the fact that there is no possible legitimacy at defining essential needs and therefore legitimate priorities in investment or in production or in the organization of services without democracy. And this was absolutely decisive in the limits and the failures of the bureaucratic planning Soviet type. The absence of democracy as a way of securing legitimate priorities of investment. And the second thing about the lessons is that what happened in Kerala is actually, and you were right to mention counting in kind, is alternative to the ways in which, for instance, global health actors do their accounting. And if we take, for instance, the cost-benefit analyses which are done at the World Bank or at WHO and so forth, it's not only a problem of monetarization, I would say. It's also a problem of epistemic or expertise or type of expertise. I mean that not everything is monetarized in these cost-benefit analyses, but at some point there are ways of objectifying what is good performance, which rely on highly reductionist hypotheses. For instance, the fact that medical progress comes only with the inventions of molecular biomedical products, and therefore that the innovation is the beginning and the end of a good policy. And finally, so which strategies have been adopted in Kerala to overcome the financial constraints? I mean, well, it's a long story. There are all sorts of attempts, but basically what the Kerala left government have almost continuously tried to do were two things. One was to try to put pressure on the central government in order to increase the share of the taxes that the center is giving back to the Kerala state, because as a regional state, Kerala has only some limited abilities at taxing. So the revenues coming from direct taxes, from Kerala taxes, is only a small part of the budget, and the rest, and basically everything that comes out of taxing revenues goes through the centers, and it's put in one single box for the nation state, and then redistributed to not everything, but a significant chunk is redistributed to the states according to a very, very complex equation. And Kerala has always considered that this equation was not favorable, and things got worse in the 1990s when the liberal turn was taken at the center. So that was one thing, to put some pressure and try to limit the dependency toward the center. And the second thing was to try to achieve some kind of industrialization, because I didn't mention it, but the one major manifestation of the no growth situation was actually that the little industrialization of Kerala, which up to the late 1970s remained mostly an agricultural state, which shifted directly into vast expansion of the service activities, so of the third sector. So in between, industrialization was never strongly there. There were all sorts of industrial incentives provided by the state and so forth. It has not been a failure at all levels. So, for instance, the Ayurvedic industry is a very important one, but it has helped to ease the question of the remittances, but it has not solved it completely. Okay, I hope this was not too too confused and going in too many directions.
So, some questions?
So,
first of all, thank you for the presentation. I kind of got lost at some point. I wanted to ask you, what about the use of maybe community currencies to keep more value inside the region? And because, of course, like most of the pharmaceuticals, they need to be outsourced, but if you keep it inside the community, maybe the care work and food supply can also be more kept within the community, right?
Hello, I'm Ben from Kerala. I think my question is somewhat related to what the discussants were mentioning, which is that despite the high development and human health indicators of Kerala compared to the Indian indicators, however, the large part of the GDP is relied on remittances and also on tourism, which is not sustainable for the long term.
Yes.
And also at the same time, Kerala, unlike the other states in India, is not heavily industrialized because the geography of Kerala, as you know, is not very favorable to industrialization due to the mountains and inland waterways. So from this perspective, what is your future view towards Kerala on the prospects of growth or generally about development? Also related to the previous presentation we had, Kerala is the only or one of the few states in India we only have a left and a center-left government. We don't have a right government, major right government. So it's also part of the reason why all of this has happened in Kerala. So it's a very beautiful state. If you visit India someday, come to Kerala and visit my home. Thank you.
I agree.
Hello, my name is Luca from Brazil as well, and the history of the construction of the universal healthcare system in Brazil is very similar.
I lost you.
Why?
I didn't hear. Sorry.
Okay. The history of the universal healthcare. Okay. Too far? Too far from. Oh, I can.
We hear you, but we don't see you. But you can talk.
Can you hear me from here?
No, now I hear you.
What is the problem with the? Oh, okay.
No, but so sometimes it's cut. I don't know why.
Okay, if it cuts, you tell me again. But
yeah, okay.
I think the history of the universal healthcare system in Brazil is quite similar in terms of there's a lot of mobilization, and it's a very specific type of mobilization that is very technical. There's a lot of doctors, there's a lot of professionals that are being mobilized and developing collective health theory and advancing those agendas. And I think we've seen in some sense over the last few 5 years, 10 years, with the non-existence anymore of the social world forum and spaces of discussion that are more bottom-up, that are more inclusive, less opportunity to internationally mobilize in a more sophisticated form of mobilization, of those high technical mobilizations that are very important for the creation of healthcare systems. So how do you see the political panorama currently to have these certain specific spaces that are more bottom-up, that are more inclusive?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's the first round.
Okay, thank you. So first thing about community currencies and the possibility that they could be used to, in a way, reinforce the local autonomy or the regional autonomy and reduce the dependency. Well, first thing I would say is that this has not surfaced as a perspective in the discussion within Kerala, or not, or just marginally. And this is connected to what I think is a kind of political weakness of the ways in which local government has been discussed in Kerala, which is that the question of the alternative or the ways in which the critical and central role of markets in the economy could be reduced. And to understand that, I mean, the fact that there are basically the probably the most important type of alternative to the market, which are supported by the Kerala left, are now in terms of classical social democratic redistribution policy. So it's about benefits. And the second thing is the support given to cooperatives. Otherwise, development about what could be, for instance, alternative ways of financing or organizing production, I mean, beyond the question of property, has been marginally present. So, for instance, the question not only of community currencies has not surfaced, but the discussion about the commons is not that present and developed. And to understand why things have turned that way, I think it has a lot to do with the local politics and the trajectory of the Communist Party. The Kerala Communist Party is a peculiar one in the sense that it was connected to Indian Maoism. It was initially very much tempted. I mean, when I say initially, I mean at the creation of the state and in the 1960s, very much tempted by the idea of the need for violence in terms of means of seizing power, and it was this has been part of the legacy of Indian Maoism, but with time it was also favoring class politics rather than caste-oriented or gender-oriented policies, even if one may insist on the fact that the question of equality between men and women was strong on the agenda. And the evolution of the party has been toward a kind of social democratization, so meaning that the class policy has been partly reoriented toward the people, toward the participation of the entire population, and the second element has been the stronger commitment to democracy, and that's also what explains the local and bottom-up perspective this politics has kept. The good dimension of it, I would say, is what our friend from Kerala mentioned, which is the fact that the left coalition is a strong social democratic coalition in the sense of what social democracy meant in Europe in the late 19th century or the early 20th century. That is a powerful democracy-based movement that provides for forms of socialization, but they are, in a way, hidden dark sides of this. And finally, second question more briefly about the non-sustainability and the remittance problem. The dependency toward the remittances is a serious drawback. It has definitely created inequalities within the state. This statement should, however, be qualified by two elements. I mean, one is that almost every family in Kerala has a migrant among the members of the family. So it's so massive that in a way, the remittances have benefited large segments of the population. Of course, not everybody, but nonetheless, it's reinforcing inequality in the sense that among the migrants, there are massive differences between the life and the amount of remittances available, whether the migrants are educated or not educated, and the qualified migration of health professionals has, for instance, been improving and very much improving the status of the families of which they belong. So in that sense, it's not sustainable, and it should somehow be substituted by some kind of internal socially oriented development, whether this improves some kind of growth or not, and whether this should take place in a perspective which is close to post-development one. This is an open debate. This is also part of what is discussed nowadays in Kerala, and my personal view or take on this is to consider that Kerala, because of the importance of the challenges associated with the ecological crisis, and here I mean the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, is having enormous consequences already in Kerala. So that if growth has to take place, it's certainly a very differentiated growth, and it should, for instance, not be a growth that result in the massive increase of the carbon imprint, for instance. And here we come back to the importance of some kind of accounting in kind. So there was something else I wanted to say about the non-sustainability, but I forgot. So I now say just one word about the parallel with the experience of the SOS in Brazil. The structure, the organization, and the priorities of the primary healthcare experience in Kerala point to two major differences with the Brazilian public health service. The first major difference is the fact that it's not only about biomedicine, it's about medical pluralism. I mean, that Kerala has been engaged in this support of Ayurveda and Western biomedicine on a par. And this is a major difference with what happened in Brazil, where the system is basically a biomedical one. with a stronger public health in flux than in many other countries, but nonetheless biomedical one. Well, in a way, it's understandable because Ayurveda has a very long history and social legitimacy in Kerala, that it is a very sophisticated medical system and so forth. But it made a very important difference in terms of what kind of expertise, what kind of knowledge is at stake, and this is somehow connected with what were the debates about the primary healthcare strategy during the 1970s and so, and the reason why, for instance, the Soviet leaders, the communist of the Soviet type, were very reluctant, or at least suspicious, of the primary healthcare strategy, because it was not, well, it was also an alternative to the type of care which was proposed by a system like the one existing in the Soviet Union, which was a public one, which was state-based, but which was entirely biomedical. So that's the first difference. And the second difference with the Brazilian experience is the importance of task shifting. I mean, the variety and the diversity and the number of the health personnel working in all these district and state infrastructure who are not physicians. And this is important in terms of a kind of democratization of who has a say about health, who has a say about the organization and the aims and the target of the health system.
Okay, so I'm Supadet, I'm from Thailand, and I want to ask you with regard to community health center, with the using it to develop the health aspect of the, let's say, developing country. Do you think is it crucial to focus on developing community health center, or would it be better off to focus on, let's say, hospital? For example, if we were to choose from increase the quantity, the numbers of community health centers or quality of community health center, or we just focus on investing in better hospital? Because I would think community health center has better reach, low cost, but at the same time, it is not, I would believe it's not as high quality as hospital. That's my question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One more.
Thank you. I'm Verity from New Zealand, and I was just thinking more about like your presentation, especially the part on remittances. If you could talk more about, I guess, like in the context of like racialized capitalism and also climate injustice, like the connection between migration and these remittances as well, like in terms of climate displacement.
Okay. Okay, short answer. I start with the first one, the remittances. Well, I'll just say that one strong reason why the remittances basis is not sustainable has to do with climate change. And precisely because oil and the use of oil is not sustainable, and therefore the wealth that has been somehow taxed by or partly appropriated by the Kerala migrants in the Gulf has no future. So this is part of the ways in which the multi-layered ecological crisis of the Anthropocene is going to affect Kerala. And it's very interesting because the last discussion I had with people at the main center for development studies in Kerala. I mean, they were pointing that. They were pointing that the basis upon which the remittances system has been built is going to fade away. Now, so community health centers and the question of the hospitals. Now, you are absolutely right in pointing to that as an issue. Among the reason why primary healthcare was put on the agenda in Kerala, but much more broadly, including at WHO, had to do with that. I mean, that in the first decades after independence in many third world countries, the big priority was to train physicians and to build hospitals. And the assessment of that commitment 10, 15 years later by many governments and health experts was that the prioritization of hospitals had served in the first place the people in the cities and had resulted in the inability of the post-independence health system to counter the bias and the inequalities of the colonial period. So the argument was that community or primary healthcare centers in the rural area is that operating at with a closer interaction with the people and taking care of the majority of the relatively simple health problem would be much more egalitarian and effective. And I think this reasoning is still important and a reason why the prioritization of community health centers could be kept. And I introduce another layer which makes this commitment even more important nowadays. It is what it has to do with bottom-up government, with democratization, and with the fact that you can have you will have a more important level of participation, of engagement, and of initiatives coming from the people if the structures are at a closer level, and will be, in this way, will be able to respond also to the differences in health needs. So the idea here is not to get rid completely of the hospitals, because, as you mentioned, for a series of technically difficult, very qualified interventions, they are necessary, but it is about the hierarchy between the hospitals and community health centers.